Hi, everybody. I'm April Cummings, and welcome back to EDBEAT. We had a hiatus of sorts. I admit, Patrick, I underestimated the internet in rural America.
What can you say about Oklahoma? That's nice.
People, people were lovely. It was beautiful. But when you get about 5 miles out of any major town, good luck on the internet. So that was that. But we are back, and man, a lot has happened. Two storms, a lot of readjustments on the school calendar as a consequence of that. A lot going on. So, Patrick, why don't you get us kick started with where you want to begin?
Yeah, so as you said, we have a lot to talk about. I think the theme of this episode is going to be the end of summer. What did we do this summer, and back to school. And we've got some new faces in education leadership, and the departure of a principal in the private sector. So we can start with what we did over the summer. And while you were on
Extended,
hiatus in
extended
Oklahoma.
hiatus.
Yes. Um, we actually had the opportunity to participate in a summer camp for
Hmm.
journalism and media that was sponsored by Minds Inspired. And it was a 2-week camp for teenagers. And it involved uh, participation from 7 media organizations on the island, including Radio Cayman, as you know, and also the Cayman Current. And it was a good time was had by all. I don't know about the kids, but we had fun. I had the privilege to conduct a writing workshop with the kids, and we talked about kind of best practices, rules of thumb, examples of good writing. The kids ended up, we took an hour, and they wrote their own headlines, edited each other, kind of had a classic newsroom brainstorming session on coming up with some good headlines. Um, and then at the end of the week, I appeared with Ralph Lewis of Cayman Times and Wendy Ledger of Cayman News Service, and we talked about our different business models for journalism, because we all we all try to make money in different ways. And at the end of the camp, which also included tours of local media, including Radio Cayman and Compass Media, which is has the newspaper and radio stations. So at the end, the kids got together and they spent a week, and they broke out in like groups of 2 or 3 people, and they created their own journalism projects. And happy to say that yesterday, those 5 projects went live on the Cayman Current website. And so I encourage everybody to go to my website as always, but really take time to check out and see the work that these kids did independently. Can't stress that enough. Is they got together, they decided what they were going to report on, how they were going to do it, and then they executed. And what was interesting to me was they had a choice of doing things in different formats, like let's do a radio spot or a TV spot or a written article. And they did it in a variety of ways, bringing that kind of youthful creativity. So there were a couple of written stories. There was kind of a classic video report. One of the teams did interactive, or not interactive, but animated graphics on traffic and things like that. So I think they had some fun with it, and really over the next week or two, I'll be plugging their stuff on my website, and I believe their content's also going to be used. One of the stories is going to be used in the Cayman Bay Times, and I think Luke Cayman is going to run versions of the story as well. So kind of give these kids a taste of local celebrity.
And I will say that I got the materials last night as well, and we'll be looking through them. I'm quite positive, though, based on at least 2 of the items I saw, that I'll post them on the Cayman Life website as well. And I'll also post links back to you, Patrick, because you are my guru of all comprehensive things coverage wise, whereas I'm superficial and post the first 3 things. But I did see some really good stuff from them, and I liked the fact you pointed it out. I liked the fact that they each chose different way or different medium with which to create this content, because I think people assume that every young person is going to want to do a 15-second video. And I thought it was interesting that they didn't all choose that path. And that, I think, speaks to the fact that we learn differently, communicate differently, and consume content in different ways, and also like to create it in different ways. The other thing, and this is just a shout out to you, I love the fact that the business models were discussed as part of this workshop. I think that quite ignored the business component of the industry for a very, very long time, only to discover that if you don't get paid, you can't eat or pay bills. So I think it is important, particularly if you're sort of an independent-minded person, but also if you want to advance professionally within any kind of news or media organization, you need to understand where the money's coming from, because that is, I don't want it to be the most important component, because I still think the work, but I also think it is equally important to be able to keep the lights on, and also to pay people and learn how to, where's the money come from, and how does it get spent, and how do we do this responsibly so it's sustainable. See, that's not just an environmental word now, it's a business word too.
Yeah, and also on the reporting side of things, they always tell you, what is it, the Watergate thing? Follow the money,
Follow the
because that's
money.
what. Actually, I had a old editor who was a business journalist in his prior career, and he said when he was a young reporter, really the heart and soul of business journalism it came down to the question of, are you making any money?
Mm-hmm.
So on the reporting side, we're told that money is so important, it makes everything happen. But then you kind of have this split personality, or, when you get in the business of your own organization, it's almost like,
Every day, where's the money?
I cannot be bothered by this. I'm ethically almost restrained from learning how my own business works. When, for me, it's been like, well, if you don't know how the engine works in the car that you're trying to drive, you're going to run into a lot of trouble.
And
And
get
I do,
overcharged trying to fix it too.
yeah, and I do think with how the media is going, and with technology, and people's increasing ability to operate independently, this is where the growth in the industry is going to happen. Is with one or a small handful of people going their own way and figuring things out and funding it as it goes along. And then perhaps these small things grow into big things in the future, or the legacy organizations learn the lessons of what the little guys are doing. But I think it's way past the expiration date for everybody to be waiting on the Hearsts and the Gannett, if it even exists, and all those media companies to all of a sudden figure it out. Because in my opinion, they're not going to figure it out.
No. And the point you raise is quite an important one. It's not just, I don't think it's unique to journalism. I just think it's highlighted specifically in our field. But there is something about that, those little smaller organizations trying different kinds of creative approaches. It's like the lean test, if you will. So you're running a lean organization and seeing what works and what doesn't. It does not mean that down the road that will not evolve into something different or larger. But in the short run, we realized that the heavy organizations with the giant budgets, that's just not going to happen right now. So you're definitely learning about how journalism works as I don't want to say creative form, because it is creative, but I think it's just an important communication function of society. That's great, but also understanding that there are business models that are going to support that or not support that, as the case may be, and also understanding the play between those things. Where for us traditionally it was the advertiser newsroom or advertising sales department newsroom sort of potential conflict. Please cover this story because that's my client and they're paying your bills. And the newsroom going, no, leave us alone. We are not going to be contaminated by money. We are after the truth. So it's that is one of the sort of the core rubs that I've always dealt with in my entire, albeit short, journalistic career. So what else? Now that I've talked you to death some more, what else is going on?
Well, school started. It's
Yeah.
kind of a big deal in education. But
Definitely.
I guess before school started, so in between the summer camp and the start of school, we were visited by two tropical storms.
Yeah.
Grace, which was a category 5 tropical storm turning into a hurricane as it
Yeah.
kicked us on its way out of here. And then we had Ida, which kind of split the difference between the sister islands and Grand Cayman. But on the school front, Grace, the government reported that Grace, they had assessed the schools for damages following Grace, didn't report anything significant. Grace didn't affect any back to school plans, as far as I know, or they communicated. Whereas,
There might have been a bit of adjustment, I think, on certain starts and orientation. There might just a tweak or two, Patrick, but nothing, no massive delay that I could see.
that's
And
right.
same for private school as well.
Yeah, because then Ida came through, and everybody was rightfully a little gun shy, I think, after
Hmm.
Grace. So everybody kind of preemptively took the day off
Yeah.
after the day after Ida was supposed to hit, and so that's orientation in public schools got canceled and delayed and shifted back a day, and so
Mhm.
schools ended up starting, I believe, Tuesday instead of Monday.
And I think the other thing that was not storm related, but because I'm living it, oh, look, I have a lovely bracelet courtesy of
Ooh.
Travel Cayman. Look at me go. I'm quarantined and working from home. Um, but one thing I didn't think a lot about were the delays that come when you have any sort of families who traveled abroad, and there were delays with certain flights that got pushed back. I guess a little bit could be a little bit grace delayed, but what that does is it means that some kids will start school a few days later than others because their families are quarantined. And you mentioned at the top, I think you mentioned at the top, there were some changes in leadership, but I also noticed there were some changes in teaching staff at some of the schools, which also some of those were not expected. And so that has resulted in certain schools doing remote sessions with some of the teachers because they are like me, got their party bracelets on and are quarantined at home. So, COVID's definitely still around, isn't it? As to the changes in leadership, we did see a few things that, well, one I didn't expect, which was a change in leadership at St. Ignatius, I think it was you reported on.
Yes, so we didn't actually write the story.
Hmm.
I was aware of, we'll say, the issues at St. Ignatius, but I do have conflicts of interest that I
Yes,
always
I know.
declare when I write about St.
Yeah.
Ignatius, and that's I have 4 children attending school there. So
Yeah.
I made the decision to kind of take a back seat on this
Yeah,
one.
fair enough.
Watched the story develop, was there as a resource
Hmm.
when other folks were asking questions, pointed them in the right direction, who to talk to. But I guess burying the lead. So they hired a new principal in March of this year named Martin Nugent. And I actually
Right.
sat down with Mr. Nugent and published a 2-part interview, maybe 3 weeks, a week or two after he got out of quarantine in March. And he outlined what he saw in the school and his vision going forward, etc. Well, he's not coming back for the fall semester, so St.
That's
Ignatius
right.
is again looking for a new principal. Um, and I think, as a lot of people recall, last year there was a lot of parental concerns and very vocal complaints about leadership and administrative issues at the school. The head teacher at the time left last
Yeah.
fall, so this is going to be the second school year in a row they're going in without a head person. But they are looking. I know they got a really good response to the last time they were searching for a principal. So it's really, as anybody knows who's running a business or in a business, hiring is so important, and it takes time.
Especially now.
Yes.
Yeah. And if you rush, you end up sometimes making a bad fit. And that is so difficult when it comes, because with Cayman and Cayman schools, it's not just about the school and the educational model of the school, in my view. It's also the culture fit for the islands, and the parents and the students and the community. That all has to work together. And just because I am a great administrator or a great teacher does not mean that Cayman is also necessarily the right place for me either. It is, because I went away a long time and came back, kept trying to get back the whole time. See how I threw that in there, Patrick? But it is a challenge to do that. We also saw a promotion, one that, so I have to declare my bias. I was on a board many years ago with this very nice young man. It was a scholarship board for my old principal, Ms. Joanna Clark, and I just thought this young man was just delightful. You know, he had a lovely energy to him. He was very positive, very hardworking, and I hope that this guy is still going to be this way now that he's been promoted through the ranks in government. You may reveal my conflict of interest now.
Yes, so the new director of the Department of Education Services, and they're the folks who actually do the nitty gritty operations running the schools,
Hmm.
whereas the ministry sits on top of the department and concerns itself with policy and high level directives. So these are the folks on the ground running the schools. So the new director of the education department is a man called Mark Ray, who
Oh.
ta has a long career in education, starting in Barbados, I believe, and
Hmm.
been in Cayman longer than I have. And he's it's interesting to me because I knew of him and had limited dealings with him as a journalist, and he was like the data guy.
Hmm.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so he's coming from a computer science, IT background. I believe he taught computers, and then he was in charge of business services for the Ministry of Education. Has been a deputy chief officer, so he's coming from a world that I really appreciate, and I spend a lot of time in, which is spreadsheets and
Data.
computers and data, and it's hard to stress how incredibly important that is for education.
Because it
So
sounds so boring, but the truth is making good decisions requires good data. Um, and I'm going to say the other aspect of Mr. Ray's background that I find interesting is that he is heavily involved in the Cayman Optimist Club, which speaks to his personality. So you've got this sort of data-driven person, but with a lovely heart. And so I'm going to be so disillusioned, Mark, if you turn out to be a bad dude. I'm going to be so upset. I'm going to take it personally. Forget journalism. I'm going to be mad on the
yeah, so
record.
I've requested an interview with Mr. Ray. I understand it's new job, people getting their wet. Um, Beginning of the new school year is like the worst time to
It's
try to
really
get a
tough, yeah.
teacher and administrator to do an interview. But hopefully in the near future we'll get a chance to sit down and maybe give him that platform to introduce himself to the community.
I think it's always a great idea to do that initial conversation to say, I've been working here, but here's this new position. Here are the things I'm interested in. Here's who I am. And then touch base maybe 6 months later just to see, because it is very different when the weight falls on your own shoulders. And this is no slight on Mr. Ray or anybody else for that matter. It's just I've learned that the hard way. It looks so simple at times on the outside. You do this and this, and it's all very clear. And then you get in there and you're like, wow, there's a million other things here that are part of this that I have to deal with. So I would really be interested in his insight from a growth perspective, a professional growth perspective as well, because that is not the easiest job to do. And we've seen from prior folks in that position that, yeah, there's so you've got push and pull from all sides. Parents, I consider the parents the ultimate boss, but parents, you have ministry, the wider community, and at the heart of it, students and teachers, right? So I think it'll be. I'd love to hear just what he learns and how it goes for him. But that's me. So maybe we'll gang up on him, Patrick, and talk him into an EDBEAT interview. I'm hoping, fingers crossed. That is not why I said the nice things about him earlier, though. It's actually because he really has been just a great resource and a lovely person to deal with. And I like to give those people shout outs whenever. Okay, so we talked a bit about the change at DES, St. Ignatius. I've mentioned the fact that we will see a little bit of an adjustment period for some teachers, students, just because of the challenges of travel. We've talked before, and I don't remember if this was on the lineup cheat sheet that you gave me. We've talked before about some of the potential issues with borders reopening, right? And while I was gone, there was a press conference that I managed to only watch the first 15 minutes of on my tiny phone, so I'm still catching up on parts of it from later. I'm exaggerating a bit, but um, yeah, I mean, it sounds like we're going to go ahead and open the borders pretty much in October, mid-October, right? So what does that mean for schools and kids?
Yeah,
And
and
I'm
I
and,
think
and remember, I'm glossing over Patrick without any details, but
yes,
in
yeah.
principle,
I think that's kind of, in my opinion, I think it's still kind of a soft promise of a border reopening.
yeah,
They had been stressing this 80% vaccination rate, which is effectively a 95% vaccination rate
right,
of
yeah.
people 12 and older. Very
And we're
ambitious.
and we're at 70 now,
Yeah,
I
we're kind of
believe.
we kind of stuck on 70%.
Yeah,
Um, so they kind of walked away a bit from that being a hard requirement for reopening, at least in some phases. But I guess the glossing over everything or getting to the bottom line is when the borders reopen, it's almost impossible to imagine a situation where there isn't community spread of COVID in Cayman, and that's something that we haven't had to deal with. And now we're in the Delta era, so it's a different situation from even last year that we were seeing play out in the rest of the world. And in addition to being much more highly contagious, Delta also seems to affect young people more than the original iteration of the virus. So, it's. Are you still there, April?
I am still here. I just muted myself because my husband walked through the thing
Oh, that's
to the
funny.
to the fridge.
Yeah, I felt like I was
So
talking to myself.
no,
Yeah,
no,
so the
you're talking to us all. So Delta.
yeah, so it'll be interesting to see um, if and when there is community spread and to what extent, and if it gets into schools, what the schools' responses are going to be. And I think we've seen so many different examples of approaches where some schools just say, you know what, we're going all virtual. Some schools say, we're going to go to an alphabet kind of system. We're going to really emphasize social distancing. Um, some kids can stay at home if they want and do virtual. Some kids will be in the classroom if they want and they're vaccinated, etc. So it'd be interesting to see things like vaccine requirements for teachers, mask requirements for everybody in the school, um, things like that. And I think we talked about this before, but a study I found really compelling in North Carolina is they found that if you mask up all the students and teachers, so if everybody at the school is masked, that's the single most effective thing you can do. And it means if everybody's wearing masks, then you don't have to worry about putting desks 6 feet apart. You don't have to worry about alternating rows on school buses. You don't even really have to worry about contact tracing and testing. As long as everybody's wearing masks, that's like the closest thing you get to the magic bullet. But again, with Delta, who knows if that's still effective?
And I think that's one of the challenges because we always look for, as human beings, I think we just want someone to give us certainty, right? If you do this, that's what's going to happen and everything will be fine. And it's not that simple. I wish it were, but it isn't. And that is going to be a challenge. I mean, depending on the personality of your children and your teachers, it can be a bit frustrating if you're a 7-year old and they're telling you you have to do this one day and then the next something else altogether. That is going to be challenging, I think. But we are watching. Clearly, Cayman is definitely spending a lot of time trying to prevent COVID from being a, sort of a day-to-day problem for us, health-wise anyway. But the other aspects of that are things that we're a little bit out of practice doing. So because I did the traveling, I have to say, I've been wearing my glasses for 3 years, or okay, 2 years, and it's the little things. I had to wear contacts because wearing the masks made my glasses fog up, and I was just meaner than a snake about that. It sounds silly, but it was a kind of a quality of life issue. So I imagine there's lots of little irritants about these behaviors that you have to readjust to should mask wearing become the norm again in Cayman, and we don't know that it will yet. There was a big battle, I think it was in Florida while I was there, between the governor and the school boards about mask mandates in schools. And then a lot of discussion, of which I have not done the research either to check on, about the effectiveness of masks and, so on and so forth, et cetera. But I think ultimately Cayman is going to have to play some of this by ear because nobody seems to have it right 100%. I don't think that that's even a possibility because it's a virus.
Yep. Yes. Expect the unexpected. Um, I did a poll in our most recent newsletter that came out on Sunday, and I just asked, what do you guys predict? What are your predictions for COVID's impact on schools? And it was kind of all over the board between schools are going to have to shut down over prolonged periods of time and go to virtual learning. And then some people said the borders will not reopen before the end of the school year. But not one single person responded, the borders will open and everything will be fine.
Well, I think we've learned it's just not that simple. So you said to me before we started, I wrote this, I'm really excited about my pencil here, Patrick. It's back to school time, and I like to have a few handy dandy crayons and pencils on hand. Um, One of the things you wanted to make sure that we talked about was, well, we did talk about the project a little bit on a prior episode about the video series, which I think is fantastic. But there was something else you wanted to make sure we mentioned today.
Yeah, we have a new face. We can't
Oh,
forget
yes.
him. We have we talked about Department of Education Services. Well, there's also the Education Council, which
Ah, yes.
is an advisory, and I don't know if they make rules, but they're the kind of independent, private sector led appointed body that advises the minister and the ministry, etc. And so the chairman of it for the past few years, since they actually changed the law saying somebody from the private sector had to be in charge of the council, had been Dan Scott, who most people know from EY, and whose father was Layman Scott, Teacher Scott on the BRAC. But there's a new Scott in town. So the new chairman of the Education Council is Shamari Scott, who a lot of people will know from Department of Tourism, from Health City, where he works currently, his leadership positions in the Chamber of Commerce, and as a guy who's born and raised here. So I texted with Shamari after I heard he was appointed to head the Education Council, and he promised. he said he's going to sit down for this interview with me once he gets comfortable in the saddle leading that organization. So that's another interview I'm really looking forward to doing.
Shamar is always good fun to talk to as well, I might point out. Just don't bring up sports because you'll never leave the room,
Yeah.
ever. Shamar also, as I recall, I should know this, he was one of the Young Caymanian Leadership Award recipients as well, and he
Correct.
was quite a dynamic public speaker. He was really, just fun and engaging and inspirational for a lot of the young folks that he talked to throughout the course of his tenure. So it will be interesting. His father and mother both actually have a great history in both education as well as in service. And by service in this case, I mean doing things like working with young people who need extra support, the boys' home at the time. His mom actually won the one of the Chamber of Commerce, I think it was Lifetime Achievement Award, but I have to verify, a couple of years back. So he comes from a family with education and community roots and heart. So it's definitely going to be my favorite thing. It's definitely going to be interesting to see sort of what his take on things is as he goes through in this leadership role. And it is a very important role because it does provide some external and internal voices together, helping sort of frame up the future of education in the islands from a government perspective in particular. So that'll be interesting.
Yeah, and here's a fun Cayman Current trivia fact is that Shamari's spouse, Nichelle Scott, she actually contributed the very first viewpoint commentary to the Current
Wow.
last year. And she wrote about issues with she saw with school segregation between Caymanians and non-Caymanians in the public and private school system here, which was a very thoughtful, well-written viewpoint that got a lot of traction and kind of really helped us increase our profile initially as we were starting from zero. So I'll always remember that.
Yeah. See, it's a small community. We all working together for the greater good. At least that's the plan anyway. All right. Anything else we need to cover before we wrap up today?
Yeah, well, I'll just give you a couple of data points, which I love. So back to school means back to traffic, and people commuting from places like Savannah and Lower Valley, won't mention any names, but they're going to find themselves stuck in queues that didn't exist over the summer, and you might be thinking, why? And of course, the answer is schools are in session and everybody's getting to school. So we did a little story quantifying this demographic issue, I suppose. So the bottom line is more than 70% of primary and secondary school students go to school in Georgetown, in the district. And it's interesting because it's just over 50% of public school population is in Georgetown. So just over 50%. But it's 98% of private schools enrollment is in Georgetown.
Wow.
And if you look over the past 10 years, there's been a 9% increase in the number of students in Cayman. All of that growth has been in the private schools. So public schools, I believe, have shrunk by about 6%. Private school enrollment has grown 35% over that time. And this is all in Georgetown.
Wow.
And then if you look at private ECCEs, so private daycares and preschools, 85% of student enrollment in the private daycares are in Georgetown. So if you want to know where people are going, that's what they're doing.
That is what they're doing. They're not just in traffic to annoy you, that's for sure. And I had done, just before I left in July, an interview with the police commissioner, who traffic is his favorite thing, right? Uh, and he was saying he'd spent some time up in the helicopter during the, not during summer, but during that time. He said, man, he's like, it's just people, he could see why people were getting frustrated because yes, there's nothing you can do. You just have to wait it out. And so I feel he didn't say this, I'm making this up, but I feel like he was recommending meditation in your vehicles each morning. So,
Yeah.
Slow down, take your time, be responsible because yeah, definitely the commute. And by the way, we should mention a lot of the jobs are in Georgetown, 7 Mile Beach corridor as well, right? So you've got that on top of it. I'm not going to want to, if my job is, let's say, at the stem of 7 Mile Beach, going to want to drive out east to drop my kid off to school and then go back to work in town and then have to pick them up again later, necessarily. That's just a convenience thing. So I can see that where we work and where our kids go to school has a huge impact on traffic. But I guess that's not anything that is a short-term fix, is it? No.
Unfortunately not.
Sadly so. All right, so Patrick, yeah, so anything we want to do real quick before we go
Yes,
here?
I will
Because
take.
my dogs are now walking in the background saying, take me out, take me out.
Well, I'll take you up on your repeated cues and prompts. So the last thing we have to talk about is I'm giving a shout out. This is in regards our TVET and STEM education mini documentary series we're working on. So while we were gone, DART signed on as the initial sponsor of the project. So we're very grateful for DART stepping up. and contributing the resources that we need to make this happen. We're still looking for other sponsors, and we're in conversations with other folks about ways to enhance the quality of the project and hopefully expand its reach. And I'm happy to report that Enterprise Cayman, which is an initiative of Cayman Enterprise City, has also signed on as a sponsor of the TVET STEM mini doc. And so they've given us some financial resources, and they've also provided an in-kind contribution to give us time in a production studio so that we can make it look professional at least. So thank you to DART, thank you to Enterprise Cayman. Very grateful for your support.
And for those of you who have not watched the segment before, remember that Cayman Current is a nonprofit. So it's a not-for-profit journalism enterprise. Did I say it right? Enterprise?
That's right.
And as a result, remember, you can go to caymancurrent.org and make a donation and support the work that we see. Now it's we. Now I'm in it.
Yes.
Support the work
the
of the
important
organization.
Work we're doing.
You're doing the work, and then I'm talking about you doing the work. But it's a great way to ensure that we continue to see coverage of issues in education in our community, not just sort of everything that's wrong or everything that's right, but really both. In an effort to improve the quality of education, because ultimately that's one of the most important functions I think journalistically we can do. So Patrick, hats off to you on that. And thank you everybody for tuning in. We'll put some information below, it's YouTube, right? Below. On how to connect to both Patrick and myself, because I keep misspelling our names in the graphics, so we won't be doing that anymore. Patrick was not there to edit me, so it's all good. All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for joining us again, and we'll be back next week. Even if there's a storm, Patrick, I say we do it anyway.
Let's do it. It's go time.
Thanks. All right, thanks everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, April.